I am MartinJon, and this is the Recover Yourself workshop. We'll be going through, I don't know if I'm live yet. It says I'm live, but we're going to be going through a number of things. And one of the greatest. Hello, everybody. I am MartinJon, and this is the Recover. Turn that down. All right, so I'm glad I caught that. I'm not sure how it works, but it works. We're doing the Recover Yourself workshop today. So a large part of what I talk about and all the things that I do is all about recovering to, beyond recovering from. I want to welcome everybody that's listening, and if you're listening to this not live, we're only going to be going through the first hour or so of this workshop, which kind of covers all of the premise of Recover Yourself Workshop. Beyond that, as part of the members that are going to be part of this group that are on Zoom with me, and the people who are looking for CEUs, all of those people. So I do continuing education units for professionals in the behavioral health field. Anybody that's here for that is going to go through a workshop, is going to be going through workbooks with me, and you should have all received those. So, in I have been doing a lot of work with my podcast recently in terms of trying to further extend the conversation around recovering yourself and recovering to something beyond recovering from it. And the stages and steps that I've been taking to do that have been going really well. I've been talking to a lot of people that talk about addiction in terms of emotional as well as digital and social media and all of these other sorts of things. So we are expanding the scope of what recovery and addiction mean. And one of the big reasons that this is important to me, and one of the big reasons that Recover Yourself is such a concept that I am backing and trying to explore, is that many people are vulnerable to manipulation. Marketing, advertising, business, sales, all of these things are trying to manipulate people. And as we have uh, continued to get better at that, I mean, I can go on to Udemy and I can find a small handful of workshops or a small handful of courses that can help me in manipulating my other people to buying my products. And that's wonderful, I suppose. And when we have products that are good for humanity, that's great. But we run into problems when we have things like Facebook, who can very easily manipulate people because people are not aware and people are not tapping into all of the things that they have at their disposal because it's so easy to be in touch with Facebook or instant gratification from next day delivery from Amazon and things like that. Like manipulating people has become something that's pretty common, and many people get manipulated into being or doing things that they otherwise, or that if they were to judge it on a neutral line, they'd find out pretty quickly that no, these aren't the actions that they want to take, that they do care about their families more, they do care about what they do with their lives more than they care about, you know, Alexa, or they more than they care about how many likes they have on Facebook. And so recovering yourself is about being in a space where you love yourself enough that you cannot be manipulated. Like, none of us like to be manipulated, but when we look at it, we can very easily say, well, I'm possibly manipulated by the drug and alcohol cartels, or, like the coffee industry or the home industry, right? Like, so many of us are like, I need a home by the time I'm 40, or I need to I need to have my own home and I need to have a car and I need to have all of these things because we've been manipulated into thinking that those things are normal to have. Well, recovering from is the concept of stepping away from something that controls our life. So much of that conversation revolves into finding better things than the thing we've had, right? Like when we talk about recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, but we don't have a conversation around recovering from overworking. We don't have a conversation around recovering from, I mean, we now have a conversation around recovering from gaming, but we didn't previously. We do have lots of Overworkers Anonymous and like Workaholics Anonymous and all of these sorts of things. And so those things do exist, but the conversations around those things are not broadly spoken about the way we talk about drugs and alcohol. And so so much that's part of the Recover Yourself process and the Recover Yourself workshop that I'm going to be talking with you about today is all about you understanding what it is you're recovering from, and so that and really talking about what are you recovering to, like what you're recovering from. We're all recovering from something. We're recovering from like childhood trauma, we're recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, we're recovering from all of these little things, and some of these things that we're addicted to, they're not going to destroy our lives, but what they are doing is making it less making our lives less and less enjoyable, even though they seem like they're things that we want, even though they feel like things that we want because we're comfortable with them, right? Like so emotional outbursts, these we and we defend them and we do all of these things. And I'm looking out at the world today, Black Lives Matter, and the horrible atrocities of not connecting um, the Brene Brown incident to the police and not having them and them no long not having to answer for their actions in our society, right? Like these are addictive behaviors in our society. So our society has, huge behavioral problems, and we focus on what we understand as addicts, right? So the addict is someone who's addicted to drugs or alcohol and they're destroying their lives outright. Well, those things are happening all over the place. And we are going to talk about the core points at what that means and how we can become unmanipulatable. Right? We don't want to be manipulated by the emotion of something happening. We want to be able to run our lives, move our lives forward in a calm space that is ethical and honest. And it will be that naturally, right? When we don't have fear, when we can trust ourselves, when we can be responsible for our actions, when we feel abundant in our lives. And abundance doesn't have to mean, right? When we say abundance, so many people think big car, big house, all these wonderful things, but that's not what abundance is. It's nowhere near what abundance is. That is a small, small part of abundance. And some people don't need that at all in order to feel abundant. And so the Recover Yourself podcast, once again, all about recovering too. We're talking about all sorts of things. In my mind, this is a wide conversation about trying to get everybody on the planet to understand that the the conversation around addiction and recovery is a lot bigger than drugs and alcohol. I look at people like what's his name, Zuckerberg, and so the owner of Facebook, and I can't help but see him as a modern day Pablo Escobar, because he is preying. He is a billionaire preying on the addictive nature of people, and I wouldn't doubt that uh, he has harmed many people um, in his. I mean, this entire country is possibly under the control of one of the worst presidents, if not the worst president that this country's ever seen, the most greedy, at least, the most egotistical, at least, than we've ever seen in this country's history. And that was caused by this thing that Mark Zuckerberg built, right? Like we there's plenty of evidence, and everybody knows now that there has been a lot of coercion and a lot of manipulation that got built through Facebook and through his platform. So I would argue that he is personally responsible for killing many people, even though he didn't outright order their murder. He initiated the platform in which and supports a platform in which continues to manipulate people into hurting others. And it's a platform for the president who is irresponsible and all of these other things. So I look at Mark Zuckerberg as a modern day Pablo Escobar, and that even the corruption that existed in the 70s and 80s in Colombia exists here as well. And it is existing to benefit billionaires like Zuckerberg. And I don't want to point him out as a specific. I mean, Bezos is just the same, the spying on everybody in our houses, as well as all of these other things. This isn't conspiracy theory time, but and I don't abide by conspiracy theories and believe in them. But a big thing is just like these people who are billionaires and are billionaires by manipulating individuals. And I want to give the individuals the strength to face the world without being able to be manipulated. But we're also emotional. So how do we stop being so emotional? And that's where recovering to comes in. Right? Understanding that our emotions is something that we're addicted to. We're addicted to feeling things. We're addicted to feeling angry and big feelings. We have big feelings because we're surrounded by so many things, right? That engage our. We're surrounded by things that engage our emotions, and we're surrounded by things like computers. We're all sitting here staring at a screen, right? Like we're looking at this, and that is creating certain chemicals in our brain, just the blue light and everything that is associated with that. And so we're going to talk today all about how to recover yourself so that you don't have to be so manipulated by the things around you. And it sucks to sit here and say, yes, I'm an addict, or I'm being manipulated. Nobody wants to be manipulated. Nobody wants to not be in control of themselves. However, it is one of the first steps in order to be able to recover to anything, is to understand that we are not necessarily in control of everything that we would like to be in control of. So, without further ado, the I want to welcome everybody, all of the professionals that are here for CEUs, and everybody that's on the Instagram Live or the YouTube Live. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking all about recovering yourself. So we all want to be distracted in one way or another, and although that practice is fine, what that practice really kind of boils down to is this sense of awareness avoidance. And there's no mistake for that to be an AA acronym as well. Awareness avoidance is something that we have been doing our whole lives. The problem with wanting to practice awareness avoidance is that we are inadvertently asking for something external to fill our lives with the exact thing that awareness brings. If we were to step outside of ourselves and say, okay, I get triggered when I see my boss, right? So I can feel nervous when my boss is at work that day, right? Like he's in his office and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Because we constantly think we're going to get in trouble. Well, that's a trigger. And we could find ways to subdue that, right? We can go for a walk, or we can go and get a coffee, or we can put something on our desk that's not natural, right? We can actually do our work, or if we're in a relationship and someone says something that just triggers us. Like those things, like if it's our boss, maybe it's a feeling of insecurity. And are we going to add awareness to that in order to say, "Hey, I'm feeling insecure. Where does this come from?" Or am I going to say, "When my boss is in the office, I feel nervous." Are we going to be aware of what's happening, or are we just going to be aware of the emotion? Because if we're just sitting here like looking at the surface and saying, "This is what I feel," well, that's great, but what you feel doesn't mean anything. What do you got? You got to be aware of you on the inside. You got to be aware of where this is coming from. Because when we don't trust people, we often try to do things ourselves and we can call ourselves, oh, well, I'm a micromanager. Or, they micromanage me. Well, they might not be able to trust themselves. So they don't trust you, but that has nothing to do with you. That's not your place. Like they can't trust. So they do something like micromanage you in order to make themselves feel more trustworthy, make themselves feel like you can be trusted. But the problem isn't you. You can be trusted just fine. The problem is that they can't trust themselves. And this happens on both sides, right? So when you can't trust somebody, they can be trusted. And if they can't, you'd get rid of them. And so you have to become we all each have to have more awareness of we have to practice more awareness because being a being a micromanager is practicing awareness avoidance. Why are we micromanaging someone who can do their job? Security is another thing, and safety. Those are great because a lot of people often feel unsafe, and a lot of people often feel like it's not secure. So much of the work around addiction is around security and safety and all of these things as well. Because when we don't feel secure, we want to escape. When we don't feel safe, we want to escape. Sometimes when you go out to the suburbs, you see everybody's got like alarms on their cars and on their houses and on everything, and they don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. Now, these are different things, safety and security. Although they run in the same circles, they can be very different. And so it's very important to understand like what is it you're feeling? And the words that you use are going to be very important. And when we get into the workbook, those are going to be things that we address more directly for you. Abundance is another one when we try and have things in order to feel abundant, but having things often makes us feel less abundant over time, right? So understanding that abundance comes from within, not from without. And so having a big house and having a car and having all of these things that we want, having a beach house and all of this, those things don't fill the hole of abundance within us, right? What ends up happening is we continue to try and fill that hole with something else, new things. That's why rich people have no I don't want to say rich people. I want to say people who are want to feel abundant through an excess of things external to them are never done. They're never happy. They're never complete because they don't know how to even be in touch with the abundance that they have within them because they have utilized this external grading system forever. And that ends up fooling with them, right? Like when you look at Mark Zuckerberg, how can Mark Zuckerberg be wrong about anything with his company when his company is such a big success, right? When everybody wants it, when everybody wants to be a part of it, when everybody wants to work for them, when everybody, all of these things. Like this is why he's so poor at taking criticism today or thinking that he's wrong. And that happens within the whole industry, right? Same thing with Bezos, same thing with what's his face, the SpaceX guy. And all of these people that have businesses or are popular or are famous or whatever, how can they be wrong? They're famous. Well, obviously those things are not equal, right? So it's real important to understand that when we practice awareness avoidance, when we avoid being aware of what we're feeling, we're not growing. So when we feel triggered because we're criticized, when we feel triggered because we're not feeling confident or whatnot, like we could double down very easily on our feeling confident, our making up the story that we're right, making up the story that we're in the right place at the right time with the right person, we have the right answer, da da da. Because this society has given us, we've been set in. So when we went to school, we were told that what the teacher says is right, and you regurgitate what she says, and then you'll do fine in this world, right? So that has helped us just be like, well, I know what's right because I have to be right. Because if I'm wrong, I get in trouble. If I'm wrong, I'm not right, and I'm not going to do well, and all of these stories. Well, we can easily see that not wanting to be aware of our feelings is trained into us. Not wanting to be aware of what we think is right is trained into us. And when that's the case, we're going to live just fine being avoiding being aware of how we feel and blaming other people and saying I know what's right, you don't, and all of these things. And so it's really difficult to kind of encapsulate it all, but awareness avoidance is the thing that we are attacking today within recovering ourselves. When we want to recover ourselves, we have to be aware of ourselves. And most of us are not. And we'll get into a way to understand how little we are actually aware of ourselves in the future in the next slide. So recovering from is the most important part of recovery for those professionals that are here and for those that are struggling with addiction and other things like that. Recovering from first and foremost. I never want to put that on a back burner. Recovering from is something that you will be doing, especially once you recognize your addiction. Once you recognize the thing that you are leaning on, you're going to much more easily be able to recover from that once you've recognized it. However, to focus on what we're recovering from, what we're doing is associating our recovery and ourselves with the things that we're trying to get away from, with the things that we're trying to separate from. So the further away we get from that thing, the more, pardon me, the further we get away from that thing, cocaine, alcohol, working, whatever our addiction tends to be, the further away we get from it, the more messed up our thinking becomes of it. We're doing research all over the world today that's telling us that less than 50% of our memories are right. So if that's the case, then it's very easy for us to alter the relationship in our minds as we get further away from it, which can lead to relapse. So as soon as we can within the recovering from process, we want to add this idea of recovering to, because the long-term recovery is born out of understanding what we're recovering to. Where are we headed? What do we want to do? Who do we want to be? There is a me in here that I want, and I know who I want it to be, and I know what it is. And it doesn't get angry, it doesn't yell, it doesn't hit people, it doesn't do all these things. Now, if it does, right? Like if that person inside of you does want to be angry and hate other people, well, those are triggers, and we'll learn how to look at those things so that we can start to love ourselves more. Because we're going to learn that everything external from us is actually happening inside. And when we can address that directly, and when we can address that properly, we're not going to want to hate people, because what it's going to do is it's going to remind us that we hate ourselves. If you love yourself, you do not hate other people. And that's simple. Like what you do to yourself, you are always looking externally to do to others. So when you find yourself triggered and you want to hurt somebody, that is something going on within you. And when everybody can understand that, then we're going to all learn how to love ourselves just a little bit more, which this world can use today. Okay, to recover yourself is to work to strengthen and expand your lives. Like that's all we want to do, right? We want to strengthen our lives, we want to expand our lives, we want this time on the planet to be fruitful and profitable in ways that are possibly that we don't even understand yet. We might be able to profit in ways that are not along the lines of the traditional way of looking at how profit works in the world of values we have today. So, recovering ourselves launches lives that are self guided, ceasing the incessant search for answers outside of ourselves. I want that to sink in a bit because we are always looking for answers outside of ourselves, which means that we can always be manipulated by something. If we are tired, we can look to coffee. If we are lonely, we can look to dating sites. If we are weak, we can go to the gym. And all of these things exist as looking outside of ourselves. Now, everything in the world has learned, every company in the world has learned how to market. And what they do is they try and spark a story within your head that says they can solve your problem. Well, if you're drunk or high, or if you're, if you're judging yourself, if you don't like the way you look, if you don't like your relationship, if you don't like your car, if you don't like your house, if you don't like all of these things, well, all sorts of stuff out in the world can manipulate you to support them. And that's how the value system in our country has developed. And whether you're a professional in in behavioral health, or whether if you're just a consumer of any kind, it's good to know that people are trying to manipulate you, right? Because if we think back to the 70s and 80s and all the early don't do drugs stuff, like drug and alcohol dealers try to manipulate you to buy drugs, and those are bad people, right? This goes back to Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar wants you to buy drugs, and if you do, then you help him profit. This is how all companies have grown since the 80s, and they've done it in more and more manipulative ways, and their products are more and more addictive because they get you to associate things. So then when you have a process happening in your mind, you get triggered to access something that makes you take an action, whether that's utilize their product like Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or whatever, makes you utilize their product. Once you utilize your product, you get that little reward of dopamine, and then you can go about your day. Well, that's addiction, plain and simple. And the idea is that these things will just take a little from you, right? Like these aren't going to be the same kinds of addictions that substance, and maybe they will eventually, but they currently aren't the same kinds of addictions, and maybe they are for some, but they are currently not the same kinds of addictions we see with crack cocaine. But they're addictions nonetheless. And we're going to get into another um, a little bit different verbiage because I utilize the word pacifiers, because pacifiers are the things that they actually are. And when we can address those pacifiers, we'll no longer have to look externally for our answers. So this is Ruby Warrington. I'm going to be playing you a little video from an interview I did with her. So today there is a desire to connect with oneself on a deeper level. I mean, you're all here because you want to do that, is my guess. Memes and pop culture are ever increasing messages where 20 years ago, before before the internet really sort of kicked in, we were seeing a real downward move in terms of judgment. Lots of people were judging others, and it was hurting society as a whole. I mean, Jerry Springer was a big part of that, and we saw that we saw a place where there was just dirtiness in the soul of our culture. And today, we can see that that has actually there is another voice. There is a positive voice, and it's possibly smaller. I mean, because we have these bubbles of information that social media gives us. In my world, everybody understands the things that I talk about, right? But for people that have a lot of hate, or people that have a lot of frustration, people that have a lot of friction in their life, we're going to see more and more of that friction, especially because when we get attached to negative emotions, that's easier to get addicted to. But still, positive memes and positive outlooks and optimism is a message that's out there in the world that is gaining some traction. So that desire forces the desire to have a deeper connection with oneself, and that desire to be positive is adding to the idea of recovering to the conversation of recovering from, or to the recovery conversation in general, all recovery. But we do want to relate it to recovering oneself, recovering to something. When we speak of recovering from, we define life as living without. As I mentioned earlier, we want to step away from something. I always look at recovering from, it's like put a pick in the ground and you grab your rope and you say, I have this much time from that thing back there. And we're actually living in fear that that thing back there will be right here at any moment. And it can be because we have a rope. The idea is to drop that rope, remember that the pick is there somewhere, and then we can continue moving forward. We don't need to stay attached to that any longer. So when we speak of recovering from, we define as living without that thing. And that's how we define our life, right? So when we can shift that and start talking about recovering to, what we immediately do is shift. Like there is no way to look back when we say we're recovering to. I'm recovering to a more peaceful life. I'm recovering to a life that was promised me, right? Like I was brought into this world. And just being brought into the world means you have a life and you're going to live it. And whatever you do with it, that's on you. And so there is a promise, whether or not we want to look at it as being a religious promise or a universal promise or or anything. A lot of people like to separate people and animals and other things like that. And I like to put them all in one thing. Like everything has been given a life to do its best with what it has. What we've done as humans is really kind of pare down everything into a singular sort of idea, right? Like education really comes in one or two kind of boxes. Success in finance really kind of only looks one way. Success in life only really looks like we can we can talk up a good game about how like, oh, I'm success, like we can look at people and say you're successful in life because you have a great family and you live to your 90s and like all of these things, and that's all fine and good. But where the rubber meets the road, where the rubber hits the road on that, it's a very different thing because success is judged from the outside. We need to be able to bring that back in and judge it from the inside, but we can't always be heard because, as I mentioned earlier, with Mark Zuckerberg not being able to take criticism or other or suggestions, or I mean, I don't know if he is or not, but it doesn't seem like that. I mean, it seems like his company just does what he wants. So once you get to a place, it's just you look around you and you can very easily say, well, if all of these people agree that I'm awesome, then I can't be wrong, right? And same thing with our current presidential debacle, right? Like we have this person who doesn't understand the simplest things about humanity, and yet he can believe that he's right somehow, right? So due to the nature of our culture, however many things we attempt to how many things attempt to give us a sense of depth, they only offer escape, right? Like so. Our president currently escapes his own fear of not being enough. Our, like the people who run our social media platforms, same thing. They do things for profit because profit means popular, and people want to be the best, these are messages that we've been giving people from the 90s and the 80s and stuff, where it's just like, you're the best, you're great. Well, no, like, you have work to do. We all do. And if we don't do that work, that's when things become problematic. Well, this again, I want to introduce you to this video clip with Ruby Warrington. Ruby wrote the book Material Girl, Mystical World, which changed the New Age phrase to now age, so that we can, because I'm someone who wants to deepen and strengthen the connections in my life, and that's and beyond that book, she wrote Sober Curious. Sober Curious is all about, obviously, being sober, or being curious about being sober, and her sober curiosity has led her to a space that she really understands a lot of this. And I want to play this clip for you. Oops.
It's not so much that I'm pro abstinence, I'm pro clarity. Whatever it takes to have real, true clarity of thought and mind and intention, that's what I am pro, because I think there are so many things in our world today that are set up and designed to steal our attention and to shape our opinions and to shape who we think we are. And we have to be super vigilant in this society that we live in now to retain clarity. And I think that any substance, any behavior that kind of clouds our connection to ourselves ultimately gets in the way of clarity.
So that's an important message, because what is clarity? And what is getting in the way of our clarity? Is our pride getting in the way of our clarity? Are drugs and television and social media getting in the way of our clarity? What is getting in the way of our clarity? And this is a big topic, and because pacifiers are little addictions. and we all have these things, right? Because yes, I spoke on my podcast, which I encourage everybody to check out. It's free, it's everywhere, and I have 40 episodes, and I usually put out an episode every Sunday, and I'll be talking about colonization this week. You may think, well, what does colonization have to do with recovering yourself? Well, colonizers are the people who kind of built all of our economic system, our education system, our religious system, our everything, right? So who you are has been subject to the topic of the colonizers, and maybe that's not who you are. Maybe you are not someone that learns the same way that everybody else learns. Everybody else, right? Like, I still only think that 12% of the population really work well within the colonizer's idea. And if you look at the economic system, which we base everything off of in this country, 70% of the wealth in this country is given to 12% of the population. The rest, the next 88% of the population, the next 88% of the population is sharing 30% of the wealth. And that is a big deal, right? Like and so these pacifiers help us live in that world. They help pacify our feelings about that. Are pacifiers working, eating, caffeine, clutter, sex, multitasking, gaming, shopping? And this is just a small list of things that we use to distract ourselves from the horrors that are around us because we can't do anything about it. Well, the thing is that there is a way that we can get in touch with ourselves, but we have to put the pacifiers down. We have to put down drugs and alcohol long enough to be able to think clearly, long enough so that we can understand ourselves. So many people will come home, turn on the Netflix, and watch, maybe even like cook dinner while the television's on. Here it is, they're engaging in an activity and have a television on. This is often to quiet their mind, because their mind is going crazy. Their mind is very active with dialogue. But that dialogue is coming from us. And if we can't calm that dialogue down, it becomes a problem. There are a lot of times people will go to work and they'll work late and they'll work a lot in order to avoid something at home, in order to avoid feeling something. And if you're doing something to avoid feeling something, well, you need to add awareness to that. There are times we have friendships and we don't reevaluate those friendships. There are times we have a marriage that we won't reevaluate. If we don't reevaluate that marriage, we're just avoiding it. Now, caffeine is one that I like to look at pretty closely because so many people drink caffeine in the morning, especially here in the United States. Look directly at coffee. I often like to ask, and this works really well when we are all in a room together, but how many of you, just think about this for now, how many of you had a coffee this morning? Okay, well, my guess is most of you. Now, how many of you chose to have that coffee? Like, I phrased it wrong. How many of you chose to drink coffee today? Everybody's hands go up. Then, how many of you actually chose to drink coffee this morning? Or did you make that decision a long time ago and are just executing it today? Because many people go to bed knowing full well that they'll be drinking coffee tomorrow, but don't ask themselves tomorrow if they're going to be drinking coffee. It's just a rote decision that was made by who you were a long time ago. This is colonization. I mean, in a nutshell, this is you making choices that were either given to you or that were developed when you were someone and something else. Yes, your consciousness is the same, but you are changing all the time. And you're changing quickly, especially today. There's so many things that are created and so many things that are invented every day that it is impossible not to change. And as you change, you need to be able to become aware of that change. So pacifiers can also be social media, emotional loops. Emotional loops are things that we're seeing today with our political system, and this isn't going to change. The politics are just learning from this and learning how to manipulate better. And so it's our job to understand us. We're not going to change politics, right? Politics does whatever it needs to do to win and to earn and to continue running. But we have to be able to understand where we have to know where we're not being aware, because when we become aware, it becomes much more difficult to manipulate us. It's more difficult to manipulate us because we're aware of what we're doing. We're no longer just acting because we're feeling something, we're feeling uncomfortable. And so we log on to social media. And then, oh, we want to play a game, so we give the game all of our information. Well, we give the game our information, and then all of a sudden, like, our information is being sold, and we're angry about it. Well, we were manipulated into doing it. We didn't want to read the fine print. Sex and relationships are the same thing. We can get into a relationship so we can feel a little better about ourselves. Many people like move into multitasking, clutter, cleaning. I know so many people that can move to cleaning just in order to stop feeling or stop thinking about stuff that they're doing. Their minds go too fast, and so gaming has finally been something that's been added to the list of things that you can be addicted to. Wonderful, and they contribute that to the lights and the interactivity and the fact that the people who design games understand the brain and understand, okay, I got to give you a hit of dopamine every 15 seconds. I got to give you a reward. If I don't give you a reward, you are going to step away from my game. If you step away from my game, I lose profits. So getting you addicted to the game is the goal. Now, if you look at this list, the goal of all of these things is reward. Television, social media, emotional loops. Like, we can say emotional loops are not not rewarding because they go nowhere. But that is coming from a calm space, right? We're going to talk later about this salient and the default mode networks of our brain. In the salient network, we have blinders on and we're only looking at one thing. And once we feel an emotion, getting it out, yelling, doing all these things, throwing stuff, whatever, that can feel a little better because it actually engages the anger. It doesn't release it. So, like it could get you tired, but it doesn't release that anger. Understanding that and being aware of the anger, that helps you not have to experience it again later down the line. Multitasking again, like being able to focus on multiple different things at once, that's easier. That helps us calm the mind. That helps us relax. That helps us do those things that we're looking for from our pacifiers. And if you look at the pacifier here, it does have the mute button on it. It does shut us up. All of these things shut us up. They keep us quiet. So when we face something like politics, marketing, all of those things, all of our strength is geared towards a mute. And we're going to mute through emotional loops. We're going to mute through shopping or gaming or clutter or sex or multitasking, all of these things. So that is an important aspect to all the things that we that these are the things that are controlling our lives for the most part. I mean, we wake up. Not everybody wakes up, meditates, exercises, and engages with themselves. Many people just wake up, have a cup of coffee, do a certain thing, put on the TV, go to work, do that, and all of these things are pacifiers because we wouldn't know what to do with ourselves if we didn't have that. So, like the coffee, where in our lives are we not showing up? Because every day we have to step away from one thing or another. And although that is normal, are we taking note of the things that cause us to want to step away? Are we taking this is the big question. What is it that's making you want to step away? What is it that's making you want to check out? You could go to your job and you can love your job, but there could be aspects of it that make you want to check out, which makes you step away from your desk, which makes you go have a cookie, which makes you do all of these things. And all of that stuff it's important for us to kind of be in a space where we understand the difference between, oh, I need to check my social media. And well, why am I checking my social media? Yeah, sure, we can put blocks on it and we could block ourselves into a little box that doesn't allow us to check social media. But can we get to a place where we're not wanting to check social media? Can we get to a place where we're not where we want to not do that, where we want to not do that enough that we don't do it? This is how you get clean from drugs and alcohol. You get to a place where you don't want to continue doing that. Now, getting yourself in a habit is wonderful, but habits are just like drinking coffee every day. You drink coffee every day, so there's a trigger and there's a reward, and you get that, great. And you can kind of create new triggers and rewards, but can you live in the moment now without a trigger or reward? Can you be aware of who you are and what you're doing without having to um, engage with this reward system that hasn't served you well, right? So awareness is noticing where we check out or where we're not choosing to engage, and just being aware can help us heal. We ask, how can that happen? Well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Well, you don't do anything. That's the point. Like, if you were to do something, you would just be looking externally once again. This is about you becoming aware of you. And you know what? As you become more aware of yourself, you're going to find that it's speaking to you. You are talking to yourself through what you notice, through how you see the world. And going through the workbook today, we're going to see exactly how that works. And then we're going to be able to put that out into the world so that it can come back to us and we can understand it. because there's a gap between the subconscious and conscious minds. And in order to close that gap, we have to become aware of what is happening around us and how it points back to us. I had a client not long ago who has been struggling and struggling and struggling with becoming a new person, and she just saw a lizard growing out of its skin, and it told her right away. She was like, "Oh, I'm growing, and it's uncomfortable, and I have to get this skin off," and that takes time, and it takes work and effort. And I was so excited when I saw her little tweet about that or whatever, and I realized that you get it now, right? Like, what you're seeing in the world is what is going on, and so how you relate yourself to what is going on around you, whether you hate it, or you think it's gross, or you think it's bad, or you think it's whatever, however you look at it, this is what's going on within you, and that's why looking at politics and getting emotionally attached to it means that you're going to be able to be manipulated. If there is anything in the world that we don't like, there is something about us we don't like. And that's something that I always want to drive home really hard for everybody, because you are so precious and you have so much to do in your life. And your life is so worthwhile that um, it's important to look out at the world and make sure that what you see is what you're bringing awareness to. So baseline living is where we bring this space of recovering to the recovering to conversation. Everything that we're talking about here, this idea of you are what you see, this idea of manipulation through government and through businesses or drug dealers, or understand that uh, there is a lot of culture that is also manipulating people into being killers or being drug users or being bad people. Like, it's not all, like, there are messages out there for everything. And so when we're recovering from those things, bringing up this conversation that you want to be comfortable within yourself and it's nothing external, well, that can't be done just anywhere. And in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we want to become secure with love and belonging. And at that point, we can say we're thinking clearly. Before that, we're heavily influenced by external forces. So, and I mean real secure in love and belonging, right? Like, when we know we have a mentor, when we know we have when we know we have someone that's going to love us through anything, that is when we know that we can start questioning our own, we can start questioning our actions. Safety is really where we want to be headed. As so this is for professionals. When somebody is moving into out of love and belonging and into safety, that is a huge place where this conversation can be had. Before that, people are looking externally. Like, even in love and belonging, I'm looking externally to receive love that I'm not giving myself. But I can start questioning myself to help me move into the safety space. So I'm no longer manipulated, I'm no longer manipulatable, and all of these sorts of things. Because love and belonging is still like you belong to something external. But we can start bringing up the questions. Stepping away from AA is one of the things that really kind of solidified a lot of this for me, because AA really kind of sits in the love and belonging space. Yes, of course, there's family and esteem and contributing that you can do within that, but it's superficial and very much looking externally for validation. And that's not where we want to be. We want to be able to offer our validation to ourselves. And when we deal with clients, bringing this up, planting seeds is great when we're in the physical or love and belonging. But really having conversations about how are you questioning yourself and going through the workbook that we're going to go through today is the key, and is at the root of what recovering to is. And I just wanted to always bring this back to the professionals, because it's important that everybody understands I'm not missing this. Recovering from is the most important aspect to all of this work. And if we're going to do it properly, we have to make sure that we've recovered from and we're no longer being controlled by drugs, alcohol, or all of these other things that we are controlled by and manipulated by when we are in a space um, of recovering from. So becoming aware of being triggered is the biggest kind of hurdle for a lot of people. A lot of people don't even know when they're triggered. I can ask counselors when you're triggered, and their pride often gets in the way of their growth. And this is still a recover from sort of thing. If your pride is in the way of you really getting in touch with yourself, then it's important to understand where that pride is coming from, and that's a trigger, right? Like we have to understand, like we're not open to hearing somebody else, we're being triggered. Where is that trigger? So what choices are you making and not making in your life? Where are you allowing other people to make choices for you? Where are you getting frustrated? I mean, I talked to someone that was in one of my workshops a couple years ago, talked about how she didn't want to do paperwork. And I said, okay, well, not doing paperwork then is a trigger. Paperwork is a trigger. And we talked, and as she went through the workbook and everything, she found that she believed she could do anything. Right? And she was told that she could do anything. And that was until the day of the word that she came to my workshop, that was a positive thing in her life. But then she realized how much fear that actually gave her for things like paperwork and for things that she really had difficulty doing. She didn't want to engage those things because they were difficult for her. And this message that she could do anything led to her believing that it should be easy as well. When do you hide? So many of us hide from people and things, right? Like that's why I'm just going to jump to this. It's like you don't want to be caught masturbating, right? Because that's something that you're trying to hide from people. No, nobody wants to see that, of course, but I mean, some people do. But your friends don't, like, right? Like your mom doesn't, whatever, right? Like there are people that don't, and you're trying to hide that from them. Well, it's okay that you hide it from them because they don't want to see it anyway. But are you hiding it from you? Like, are you trying to avoid that happens? Are you trying to avoid that you gamble? Are you trying? Like, I know there are times when I would, like even let's say I'm not someone who wants to be seen in flip flops. Let's just say, if I were to be at a hotel and put on a pair of flip flops, I would feel embarrassed leaving the room in flip flops, even though nobody there knows me. I would be ashamed, and I would have these feelings that are associated with that. And I do that, like there are times where like, oh, like I'm just gonna put this on and run outside. And that's fine, like, because I don't care really how I look, but there are some things that kind of come into play. Like when I ride my motorcycle, I usually want to make sure I have my boots on. That's an image thing. Those are places that like I don't want people to see me. I don't want people that I know to see me without my boots when I'm on my motorcycle because there's an image that I'm trying to uphold. Well, what is that about? That's a trigger. Who and what gets us angry? Who and what gets it? Like there could be one person that just gets us angry no matter what they say, and there could be something that individuals say that get us angry. I remember the word douchebag. If you called me douchebag, I would be livid. And a friend of mine that cared about me quite a bit called me a douchebag once, even knowing that, and it was a joke, but it hurt me, and it gave me the opportunity to really tap into the trigger. And so I was super grateful that she did that. Yes, she's being a bitch or whatever, like all of these sorts of things. But I didn't look at it that way. I looked at it like you actually gave me an opportunity to look at the trigger deeper because I had a deeper emotional response because you're someone that I felt safe with and I wasn't. Well, now what is this, right? Like, what is this that I'm feeling? And of course, I love you. So I'm going to look inward rather than outward in order to examine those feelings. And it was beautiful. And I was really happy that happened. Um, what happens when we're taken out of our structured day, right? Like someone says something, like our boss tells us to move. Are we able to adjust quickly? Or are we kind of stuck in one mindset? How do others respond? How do we respond when we or others don't meet our expectations? Um, this is another big one. These are triggers. These are ways to find how we get triggered. For those on YouTube, we're going to be breaking off now, and this was all about trying to help you understand the scope of what recovering to entails and what recovering yourself entails. I hope that if you watch this, you'll join me on my next workshop so that you can gain access to the workbook and move forward with the writing and meditation exercises that we'll be doing in order to answer some of these questions and find our individual stories behind all of this because you are like nobody else. And we need that. We need you, right? We don't need you to be like other people. And so these questions are all very open ended, but they are it's built very specifically to get you to work on you and being less manipulatable, being more secure in who you are because you're beautiful. You're born beautiful. You are beautiful. And if you're looking externally for other people to remind you of that, um, that just means that we need to do more work to find ourselves. Because I mean, I still look externally for that, right? I want people to be at my workshops. I want people to listen to my podcast, and I want all of that. But I know that in the end, it's going to always be me. It's always got to be about me. It's always got to be about how comfortable I am and where and when I can be myself and how much I can do that. And every day, we try to do it a little more. All right, for those of you on YouTube, thank you very much. Have a great day. And until next time, keep recovering yourself. Yep, I got to turn this off, so it's going to be a little awkward by the time I'm going to stop the live. I gotta stop the live stream. Keep recovering yourself, folks.